Greetings from the Jazz Cloud. I'm Richie Zellon, and in this video I bring you the second in a series of 10 tips to improve your jazz guitar solos. Tip number 2, learn to use permutations to create variety and expand your vocabulary. Coming up next. Welcome back to the Jazz Guitar channel, and if this is your first time and you want to learn all about the art of playing jazz guitar, you've come to the right place. I bring you weekly lessons covering everything from chord melody, harmony, improvisation technique, and much, much more, all from a guitar perspective. So I want to encourage you to subscribe and be sure to click on the bell icon so you won't miss anything. In the previous and initial lesson of this series, my tip was stop thinking in scales. And I explained how, in spite of the fact that we derive our information from scales, when improvising over chord changes, we need to focus on the arpeggio. That is the 1, 3, 5, 7 of the corresponding scale. And I demonstrated through various examples what happens when we just run scales in stepwise motion. We end up not implying the given standard's prescribed harmony, and as a result, we not only sound very ambiguous, harmonically speaking, but we sound like we're just running scales. And I hate to say it, but we guitarists are notorious for this. Today's tip is a continuation of the tip to think in arpeggios instead of scales. And what I want to add is that even though you are always going to sound much better when focusing on the arpeggio when soloing, after a while you are going to become very predictable and even boring. So this is where the power of permutations comes to the rescue. And yes, here we are tapping into the mathematical foundation of music. Many of the great jazz improvisers have worked extensively on permutations in order to expand their vocabulary and to systematically explore ideas that they wouldn't have ordinarily stumbled upon just from using their imagination. For example, what do John Coltrane and Allan Holdsworth have in common? Well, that both practiced using composer Nicholas Slonimsky's thesaurus of scales and melodic patterns, which is the Bible of musical permutations. And there is also another system based on permutations that came up during the first half of the 20th century that I want to mention. And many jazz and classical musicians studied it. And I'm referring to the Schillinger System, which was devised by Joseph Schillinger. As a matter of fact, what we know as Berklee College of Music today was originally called the Schillinger House. And it was probably the first school to teach jazz improvisation, initially focusing on this permutation system. So after giving you some historical background on the use of permutations, let's talk about diatonic and chromatic permutations of the arpeggio. Diatonic permutations of the arpeggio consist of using approach notes to a chord tone that belong to the key signature of the standard that we are improvising over. For example, say we are in the key of G and we have an E-flat dominant 7 chord. The arpeggio we know consists of the root E-flat, the major third G, the perfect fifth B-flat, and the minor 7th D-flat. So if we want to insert a diatonic approach note that resolves to either of these chord tones and will better portray the function of the given chord in relationship to the key signature, what is the procedure? Well, First, we delineate our arpeggio. Second, I am going to give you a crash course on 7-note scale formation. And it consists of filling in the spaces between all of our chord tones with notes that pertain to the current key signature. There is, however, an exception. They must not create an interval that exceeds a major second or whole step between it and any of the two surrounding chord tones. So if we insert an F sharp between the E flat and the G, we have an interval of a minor third from the E flat to the F sharp. So the F sharp, even though it is in the key signature of G, it is disqualified. It must then be an F natural. And this also explains why you will never have flats and sharps within the same scale. So with this in mind, between the G and the B flat, let's insert an A, which is diatonic to the key of G major. Notice that it does not exceed a second between either of the surrounding notes. Finally, between the B flat and the D flat, we insert a C, which is also diatonic to the key of G. Again, it does not exceed a whole step between either of its surrounding chord tones. So if you're familiar with all your scales, you'll notice that the final result is a Lydian flat 7 or Lydian dominant scale. And this is the theory that determines what scale is to be used over any chord in a tonality. So now we can use these notes in between the arpeggio, but again, not necessarily up and down in a scalar fashion. Let me demonstrate. So this is the arpeggio. And this is the scale that we've determined fits this arpeggio or chord within the key of G. Let me demonstrate how I would insert some of these diatonic approach tones before one of the arpeggio chord tones. Let's descend using the arpeggio from the highest available note, which would be its fifth here, the B flat. So let me approach all the thirds with the note that we've inserted in the scale, which would be the F. There we have two insertions. The 2 before playing or resolving to the 3, 1, and now the 6 resolving to the flat 7. See, these are approaches. We can also approach the 5th. And in this manner, we get that vertical sound that implies the changes, that implies the harmony, versus just running scales, you know. Okay? Now that's fully diatonic. The second use of arpeggio permutations is using non-diatonic, or what we call chromatic permutations. And note that here we are using the term chromatic in reference to notes that are not part of the scale that we are using. For example, earlier with the diatonic approach, we used the second to target the third. And the second was an F. Now, let's target it with a chromatic note, half step below, which is this F sharp, which is not in the E flat, Lydian flat 7 scale. So if I start the arpeggio up here on the highest available note, that alone creates an interesting little phrase. Just that chromatic permutation targeting the 3 and then continuing down the arpeggio is already jazzy. And notice how much more tension it creates than using the diatonic option or the natural 2. That's with the 2, and this is with the chromatic permutation. It's bluesier, it's jazzier. So we can combine them and there I'm targeting all the arpeggio tones with these approaches, both diatonic here to the flatted 7, chromatic here to the 3rd, and diatonic here to the 5th. So that covers my second tip. If you're an intermediate guitarist and want to know more about how Coltrane and a host of other greats have used the Slonimsky method that I previously mentioned to structure their lines, I recommend you check out my mini course on the Slonimsky system. And you can find a link in the info section down below. Now, if you simply need help systematically working out all the approach note permutations for all the different arpeggio families, please don't go crazy and waste your valuable time trying to reinvent the wheel. It's all been worked out and laid out for you in a logical manner. And I've got 2 comprehensive online courses and 6 books that will help you achieve this step by step. Yes, there is a method to this madness that we call jazz improvisation. So check out the Bebop Guitar Improv series. Be sure to check out the link down below. In the next lesson, I will show you how to smoothly connect your lines between chord changes so that your ideas don't sound fragmented. So don't miss tip number 3. I'd love to hear your comments and welcome any questions you may have. Hope you've enjoyed this lesson, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please do so, and be sure to click on the bell icon so you won't miss a thing. Have fun, and I'll see you in the next video.